Hello, this is Pretty Guardian, and for today's video, we are going to be talking about the action JRPG Tales of Arise. This game came out in 2021 and was published by Bandai Namco. And just in general, I'm not a fan of theirs because they are those like big evil corporate overlords that don't like content creators to make videos about them. But I put 100 fucking hours into this game, so please believe I'm going to be telling you all about my experience with it. So in general, I am a big fan of the Tales of series. I think the first one that I played was probably Tales of the Abyss. And then my favorite one so far has been Tales of Berseria. I just thought it was a beautifully animated story with really interesting characters. As far as Tales of Arise, that was their most recent entry into this franchise, and overall, it was a really good game. The graphics are absolutely stunning. They take us to a wide variety of detailed and beautiful zones. We have like hot desert climate, a nice snowy biome, verdant forested areas to explore, lots of really cool and like well done areas in this game. And then just like beautiful, immaculate cities and places like that as well. The story of this game centers on two neighboring planets. We have Dana, which is where our main characters first meet and start interacting. And then we have Renna, which is the neighboring planet. Renna, about 300 years prior to the start of the game, conquered Dana and is basically enslaving all of the Danans and siphoning their energy like in some sort of like magic funnel back up to their homeworld. And the Renans do this thing where every 10 years they send down 5 lords who rule over the Danans and siphon off as much energy as they possibly can, and whichever of them siphon off the most energy gets to go back to Renna and rule Renna. So thematically, there's a lot of like parallels that could be drawn to racism and slavery and just kind of that sort of conversation there. And while I don't think the plot ever really dives into it as much as it could, I think one thing that it does reasonably well is giving a wide variety of perspectives on the issue from the point of view of the Danans, the Rennans, different factions within there, and then all 6 of our characters are kind of coming from different backgrounds as well and bringing different perspectives into this conversation. So to talk a little bit about our characters, we have Iron Mask, who is just kind of that sort of like typical anime hero. He's very easygoing, kind of unites the group. He is a sword fighter, and when we first meet him, he has this almost like superpower type thing where he can't feel pain. Then he meets Shion, who is a Renin, and she fights with a gun and also uses healing magic. And she has a very like sort of standoffish tsundere sort of personality. She has these thorns that are like magically entangling her heart, and whenever somebody touches her, the thorns lash out and it causes them physical pain. So her and Iron Mask almost kind of have this relationship where she can touch him and he doesn't necessarily feel pain. So it kind of creates this opportunity for them to grow a little bit closer together, and you kind of come to find out how their fates are intertwined. Then they meet Renwall, who is a Danan mage. So within the context of this game, Renans are considered to be the only ones who can actually use magic. So when we meet Renwall, it's kind of surprising that she also has this power, but she's actually a Danan. I think this is good foreshadowing for things that come later in the game, but also I think that she has kind of an interesting story on her own, where the mages of Dana were actually able to use their powers to kind of sequester themselves and hide from the Renans who invaded. So they kind of got to live their lives without being under the direct influence of Renan rule. Then we also meet Law, who is a martial artist, fist fighter. He also has a very easygoing personality and is almost kind of like a little brother to Iron Mask. And Kisara. So we meet Kisara in the city of Menancia, and she is the bodyguard for the lord there. His name is Dohalem. And in Menancia, the characters see kind of a different perspective where Dohalem was a little more reasonable, a little more benevolent, and kind of worked with his people. So they were able to kind of flourish under his rule, where Danans and Renans were kind of able to work together. So she's Dohalem's personal guard, and she fights with this big, gigantic shield. She is just, you know, a tough paladin ready to save everybody. I also really like a lot of her characterization on the side because you kind of find out that she likes to cook and likes to fish and is really just kind of a sweet and simple woman. And I mean that in like the best way possible. And finally, we have Dohalem, who was one of the 5 lords sent to rule over Dana of the city of Menancia. And through the events of the game, he joins the party and he fights with a staff as well as magic of his own. These characters go on an epic quest across Dana to stop these 5 lords and liberate the Danans. After that point is where the plot kind of starts breaking down a little bit for me. The reason I bring it up is because it is such a big part of the game, but it's just so starkly different from this like first 2/3. So within that 3rd act, we end up going to Rena, and it turns into this whole like science fiction thing. There's spaceships, space stations, aliens, all kinds of like crazy stuff that happens there. And the way it's presented just feels so disconnected from the first part of the game. I wish that instead of maybe having 5 lords, they had 4 lords and did a little more foreshadowing for the stuff that was going to be happening on Rena so that we didn't have quite as much exposition as we had at that point. And they could have staggered the story out a little bit better. So you got a little bit more up front, a little bit more throughout, and a little bit less there at the end. And then using some of that extra budget from having removed that 5th lord, they could have given us a little more to do as far as like quests and enemy types and things like that in that 3rd act. After beating the game, which for me was around the 70-hour mark, I put it down for a time and I was just kind of like, what the fuck did I just play through? I didn't really know how I felt about it. I didn't love it, honestly. Like, it's not really one of my favorite Tales of games. But recently I came back to it, and I came back to it because I wanted to try some of the Endgame content, and then I also wanted to make this video about it. And so after jumping into some of that Endgame content, I've started on some of the Endgame dungeons and replayed the final boss. I will say that my overall feelings of the game have changed a little bit. After replaying the ending, I was kind of like, oh, you know what? This is actually pretty good. I thought the final boss fight was decent. I thought some of the animated bits at the end were decent. I felt like it wrapped up the story for those characters reasonably well for the game. So I did actually really enjoy replaying that ending. And I think their endgame content is relatively impressive. They have some different quests and dungeons and more enemies that you can fight, including some cameos in there. Overall, it's really good stuff. And if you're a fan of the Tales of Arise series, it's definitely endgame content that's worth playing. To talk a little bit about some of the different mechanics of the game, it is first and foremost an action JRPG. So the battles are fought in real time and the animations for them are just absolutely stunning. You can combo together different attacks. You can kind of pick out the different attacks that you want to use, and the characters have different synergies that play off of each other and different mechanics within those fights that they need to use in order to win. So for example, if you have an armored enemy, you want Law to come in there and he's able to break their armor, and then you're able to continue the fight against that enemy. Outside of combat, you have the main story quest, and then you also have side quests. There is cooking, there is fishing, there's also some collecting mechanics. You're able to find owls around the map and collect them that way. Depending on different achievements and things that you unlock in the game, your characters earn titles, which are basically additions to their skill tree. So you can continue progressing your characters' powers that way as well. So a lot of those systems kind of intertwine in a way that feels very rewarding. One thing I did notice though, and this is going to be a huge negative on this game for me, is that during the camping scenes, you're directed into going and buying DLC for this game. And some of the DLC is just like straightforward cosmetic stuff, but then a lot of the DLC also has to do with character progression. So you can buy character levels, you can buy boosts that make it so you can stay out and fight longer, you can buy just different things that progress your characters that way. And I wouldn't normally be so bothered by that, except within the actual gameplay itself, it feels like your progression is stunted a little bit. Like it is harder to gain levels. And I feel like that's because they were kind of trying to make it so that the game was burdensome enough that people would want to go and buy those power-ups. And for me, for a AAA game where you're spending at least $60 already just to play it, that was kind of a big negative. Overall though, it's still a pretty decent game. Something that I like to do with games is I'll think about it as in like a cost per hour of how much I play it. So if I'm spending $60 on a game, I would like to get at least 60 hours out of it. I know that that's not always reasonable and that there are some games that are going to be shorter, but absolutely still worthy of being played. This is just kind of an exercise. And so when I consider that I am 100 hours into the game and I'm just kind of still playing through some of that endgame content, it definitely feels like something I've gotten my money's worth out of. So it's definitely something I would feel comfortable recommending to my audience here because of the amazing graphics, the great gameplay, the interesting story and characters, and then just kind of that long epic storyline that you can jump in and really enjoy. Low key, the music in this one wasn't that bad either. There were a few standout tracks throughout the gameplay, and then also there are a couple title songs that play as well, and both of them I thought were really good and ended up on my Spotify list at home. And that was my review of Tales of Arise. So thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, definitely like, comment, subscribe. You know, all of those YouTube-y things that helps my channel grow. I am so grateful for it. Definitely jump down there in the comments section and let me know what JRPGs you're looking forward to, or if you've played Tales of Arise, what were your thoughts on the game? And until next time, this is Pretty Guardian, logging out.